The hum of the highway at night, a familiar comfort, can sometimes be the very sound that leads you astray. Tonight, we journey down paths less traveled, where the familiar becomes unsettling, and the shadows stretch a little further than they should. Dim the lights, put on your headphones, and let the outside world fade away. For the next hour or so, we'll be exploring the quiet terror that lurks just beyond the glow of your headlights, the kind of dread that whispers when you're all alone on a long stretch of road. Prepare yourself for tales of wrong turns, inexplicable detours, and the chilling realization that sometimes the most dangerous place to be is simply lost. The cabin had been in my family for 3 generations, a rustic escape deep in the Adirondacks, but the directions my grandpa left me were always a little off. He'd scribbled them on the back of an old tax receipt, full of landmarks that vanished 20 years ago. This trip, my phone had 0 signal almost 2 hours out, so I was relying on his faded ink and my memory of previous visits. It was late September, the kind of chilly evening where the woods already felt heavy with winter, and I was looking forward to the absolute silence. The cabin was primitive, no running water, just a well pump and a wood-burning stove. Exactly how I liked it for a solo weekend. The last turn was supposed to be a logging trail, barely more than 2 ruts in the dirt, but I kept passing it. Or maybe I was looking for the wrong trail. The sun was starting to dip, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, and the woods were getting dark fast. I'd been driving for what felt like forever on these unpaved roads, doubling back a few times. My gas tank wasn't exactly full when I started, and the gauge was getting uncomfortably low. Finally, I spotted a track that looked promising, overgrown, but with just enough space for my old pickup. It plunged immediately into thick pines, the kind that block out the last light of day. I slowed to a crawl, navigating around potholes and fallen branches, the truck groaning in protest. There was an unnerving quiet out there, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every creak of the suspension and every rustle of leaves. No distant highway hum, no other cars. Just me and the darkening forest. After what felt like an hour, I rounded a bend and saw it. A small, weathered cabin bathed in the faint glow of the twilight. It wasn't exactly our cabin. Ours had a distinctive stone chimney, and this one was wood. But it was close enough, and honestly, at that point, I was just relieved to see any structure. Maybe Grandpa had added a new outbuilding, or I'd taken a slightly different path to the same property. I parked the truck, killed the engine, and the silence that descended was absolute. No crickets, no whine through the trees, just the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine. A faint, almost imperceptible smell of wood smoke hung in the air, which was odd, since I hadn't seen any other signs of habitation. I decided to stretch my legs and check it out before digging through my gear. As I got out, I noticed a light was on inside the cabin, a dim, yellowish glow from a single window. My cabin didn't have electricity, only kerosene lamps. My stomach tightened a little. Someone else was here, which was highly unusual. Our cabin was so isolated, we rarely saw anyone. I walked slowly towards the front porch, trying to figure out if I should knock or just back away and find my actual cabin. The porch light, a bare bulb in a rusty cage, flickered on just as I reached the first step. It cast long, dancing shadows that made the surrounding woods look like a wall of dark, watchful figures. The suddenness of it, combined with the fact that it was an electric light in the middle of nowhere, made my heart beat a little faster. I stood there for a good minute, just staring at the door. It was solid oak, with a heavy, tarnished brass knocker. My hand was hovering, ready to knock, but something held me back. Felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. Then, from inside, I heard it. A faint scraping sound, like furniture being dragged across a wooden floor. I froze. Who would be dragging furniture at this hour, in a cabin this remote? It was too rhythmic to be accidental. It stopped abruptly. I held my breath, listening so hard my ears started to ring. Then, clear as day, a soft rap came from the other side of the door. Not a knock with the knocker, but a gentle, deliberate tap against the wood, right where my hand had been hovering moments before. It sounded like a courtesy, a quiet, "Hello?" I took a step back, my eyes fixed on the door. The porch light flickered again, almost going out. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe someone saw my headlights and was just being friendly. But that quiet tap, after the scraping, felt anything but friendly. I backed away another step until I was off the porch, and then I heard the footsteps. They were slow, heavy, and deliberate, moving away from the door, deeper into the cabin. It sounded like someone was pacing, or maybe just walking slowly. The floorboards creaked under the weight. It was too quiet outside to miss anything, and the sounds carried so clearly through the thin walls. I could almost visualize the person moving through the small, dark space inside. My mind finally put the pieces together. This wasn't just a different cabin. This wasn't even on our property. This was some other place, miles from anywhere I recognized, down a road that was definitely not the logging trail Grandpa described. I remembered the map in my truck, the crumpled, hand-drawn one with the old landmarks. I hadn't looked at it since I lost signal, but now I knew. I had taken a completely wrong turn, ended up on a road that didn't exist on any modern map, leading to a cabin that certainly wasn't ours. The footsteps inside stopped. A long silence stretched out, broken only by my own ragged breathing. I had a profound, icy certainty that whatever was inside knew I was there, and was now just waiting. My eyes darted to the window where I'd first seen the light. It was dark now, but as I watched, a flicker, almost like a shadow, passed across the pane from the inside. It was too quick, too indistinct to make out details, but it was there. My blood ran cold. I knew with absolute certainty that I was being watched, not just from behind the window, but from the darkness of the woods surrounding the cabin. The silence felt oppressive, heavy, like the entire forest was holding its breath. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get back to my truck, to get away from this place that felt so deeply, fundamentally wrong. I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. I just stood there, paralyzed by the dread of unseen eyes. I finally broke free, stumbling backward, then turning and sprinting for my truck. My hands fumbled with the keys, shaking so badly I dropped them twice. The engine coughed once, then twice, before finally roaring to life. I jammed it into reverse, spun around, and floored it back down the overgrown track, not caring about the bumps or scrapes. I didn't look in the rearview mirror, didn't dare glance at the cabin disappearing behind me in the dark. I just drove, pushing the old truck as fast as it would go, until I finally hit a paved road. A road I didn't recognize, but a road nonetheless. I drove for hours until I found a gas station with working cell service, miles and miles from where I'd started. My tank was on empty, and I still don't know where that cabin was or who or what had tapped on that door. That feeling, the one where the road just changes. It's a subtle shift, a whisper of wrongness that gnaws at you. But what if the road wasn't the only thing that could shift without warning? What if the path you're on leads somewhere you weren't meant to see at all? The gravel crunched under the tires of my beat-up Subaru, a sound that always felt too loud out here, echoing in the vast silence of the national forest. I was 17 that summer, spending a month at my uncle's cabin in northern Maine, a place so remote that the GPS usually gave up miles before you even hit the turnoff. My parents thought it would be character building to have me disconnect before college, and honestly, after a brutal junior year, I was ready for it. No cell service, no internet, just books, a fishing rod, and the occasional trip to a general store that was a good 45 minutes away. It was perfect most of the time. The only real connection to the outside world was the long, winding dirt track that led back to the main road, maybe 3 miles of bumpy, isolated terrain. That road was the only way in, and the only way out, and you learn to cherish the sight of it. My days fell into a predictable pattern. Wake up with the sun, make some instant coffee, read for a few hours on the porch swing, maybe hike down to the stream for some fishing. Evenings were for campfires, cooking simple meals over the open flame, and watching the stars blaze impossibly bright. I was completely alone, but it was a comfortable solitude. I'd gotten used to the creaks and groans of the old cabin, the rustle of animals in the woods, the way the wind sometimes sounded like hushed whispers through the pines. Every few days, I'd make the trek to town for supplies, mostly just ice and a few groceries, enjoying the brief human interaction before retreating back into my quiet bubble. The only real rule my uncle had was to keep the cabin locked, especially at night, and to never, ever open the door to anyone I didn't recognize. "It's a lonely stretch of land out here, kid," he'd said, "and not everyone who wanders through means well." It was about 2 weeks in when I noticed the package. I just finished breakfast, sipping my coffee on the porch, when my eyes drifted to the small wooden bench by the front door. There, sitting neatly, was a brown cardboard box, taped up securely, with no return address, just my last name scrawled on it in thick, black marker. My stomach tightened. I hadn't ordered anything, and even if I had, no delivery service came out this far. They wouldn't even know this place existed unless they had exact coordinates. And even then, the road was barely passable for a regular delivery van. I picked it up. It was light, probably no bigger than a shoebox. I brought it inside, my mind racing. Had my uncle sent it? But he always called first, and besides, there was no phone service here. Felt wrong, like it had materialized out of thin air. I carefully cut the tape with a kitchen knife, my heart thumping a little faster than usual. Inside, there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. Just an empty cardboard box. Not even packing peanuts or tissue paper, just the raw, brown interior. I checked for a false bottom, looked for any hidden compartments, but it was just a plain, empty box. I stood there, holding it, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. It wasn't a prank. There was no one to prank me. It wasn't a mistake. It had my name on it. It was just there. An empty box delivered to a cabin miles from anywhere by an unknown sender on a road no one else used. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe an old delivery my uncle had forgotten about, somehow left behind, but it looked new and used. I pushed the unsettling feeling down, telling myself it was nothing, just a weird anomaly. I threw the box into the fireplace, deciding to forget about it. The next few days I was jumpy. Every rustle in the leaves sounded like footsteps. Every creak of the cabin seemed deliberate. I started keeping the curtains drawn after dusk, something I hadn't bothered with before. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the isolation was finally getting to me. But then, late one afternoon, I was out by the stream, trying my luck with a new lure. The sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows. I heard it then, a faint, almost inaudible whisper, just beyond the thicket. It wasn't the wind. It sounded like a human voice, low and indistinct, as if someone was talking just out of earshot. I froze, my fishing rod still. I waited, straining my ears, but it faded. I told myself it was just the stream or maybe an animal, but the hairs on my arms were standing up. I packed up my gear quickly and headed back to the cabin, locking the door tight behind me, double-checking it this time. It was a little past midnight, maybe 3 days after the whisper, when the knock came. 3 distinct, firm knocks on the front door. Not tentative, not a branch hitting the wood, but someone deliberately rapping their knuckles against the solid oak. I was awake, reading by the dim light of a battery-powered lantern, and my blood ran cold. I sat absolutely still, clutching the book, barely breathing. Who could possibly be out here? There was no road that led directly to my cabin. You had to turn off the main dirt track and navigate a winding, unmarked path that was practically overgrown. No one just showed up. I listened, my ears straining against the profound silence that followed the knock. I heard nothing. No footsteps retreating, no car engine, just the buzzing in my own ears. I didn't move for what felt like an hour, staring at the locked door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then, a soft scraping sound, like gravel shifting under a shoe, right outside the door. Then another closer to the window. It was slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing or circling the cabin. My mind screamed at me to grab something, anything, but I was paralyzed. I heard the distinct rustle of clothing, a faint intake of breath, and then the sound of something being dragged, ever so slightly, across the wooden porch. It stopped directly outside my bedroom window, which was thankfully boarded up from the inside with thick plywood, an old hurricane precaution. I heard a soft tap, tap, tap against the wood, as if someone was gently testing its strength. I pressed myself against the far wall, my eyes wide, tears blurring my vision. The sounds went on for what felt like an eternity, circling, stopping, tapping, always just out of sight, always too close. I must have drifted off from sheer exhaustion, because the next thing I knew, weak sunlight was filtering through the gaps in the curtains. I lay there, rigid, listening. Nothing. The cabin was utterly silent, save for the distant chirping of birds. I slowly got up, my muscles aching, and crept towards the front door. I peered through the small peephole, but saw nothing amiss on the porch. Taking a deep breath, I slowly, cautiously, unlocked the door and swung it open. The porch was empty. The gravel path leading up to the cabin was undisturbed. No footprints, no marks, nothing to indicate anyone had been there. The only thing out of place was a small, perfectly smooth, gray river stone sitting neatly on the doormat. It hadn't been there the night before. I picked it up. It was cold to the touch. I didn't understand. Who would do this? Why? I left the next morning, cutting my trip short. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the certainty that someone knew I was there, had been there, and was still watching. As I drove away, down the long, winding dirt track that led back to the main road, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Just past the bend, where the old oak tree used to mark the point of no return, a faint, almost imperceptible path branched off into the deeper woods. It was barely visible, just a faint indentation in the undergrowth, but it was there. It looked like a deer trail, but it was too wide, too straight. It looked like someone had been slowly, carefully, making a new road, directly into the heart of the forest, away from anything marked on a map. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, a cold dread washing over me. It hadn't been the main road they were watching. It had been the path I took, the hidden one, the one that led only to me. Sometimes, when you're driving in the dead of night, you catch a glimpse of something in your peripheral vision. A flicker, a shape that doesn't quite belong. You tell yourself it's nothing, just the darkness playing tricks. But what if it wasn't a trick? What if that glimpse was a warning? A sign that you should have kept going no matter what? The thing that still gets me about that weekend is the faint, almost imperceptible scent of wood smoke that clung to my clothes for days afterwards. Even though we never lit a fire. I was 22, freshly graduated from college, and looking for a way to blow off some steam before diving into the job hunt. My buddy, Alex, had inherited this old hunting cabin from his eccentric great-uncle. It was way out there, in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, the kind of place you needed a map printed in 1980 to even hope to find. We packed up his beat-up pickup with enough junk food and cheap beer to last a week, figuring a few days of total disconnect would be exactly what we needed. No cell service, no internet, just us and the woods. That was the whole appeal, really. Getting there was an adventure in itself. The last 10 miles were on a gravel road that eventually turned into nothing more than two muddy ruts winding through dense forest. Alex swore it was the right way, that his uncle had described it perfectly, but after an hour of crawling along, the sun starting to dip below the ridge, I was getting a little antsy. We finally rounded a bend and there it was. A small, weathered log cabin, practically swallowed by the trees. It looked exactly like something out of a horror movie, but in a charming, rustic way. No power lines, no visible well pump, just the cabin. A true off-grid experience, just as promised. We figured we'd have to use a hand pump for water and kerosene lamps for light. We spent the first evening exploring the place, marveling at how primitive it was. A big stone fireplace, a rickety table, 2 cots in the main room, and a tiny, separate outhouse. It was exactly what we'd signed up for. The air grew cold fast, so we bundled up, cracked open some beers, and played cards by the dim light of a kerosene lamp. The quiet was incredible, almost suffocating at times. No crickets, no distant traffic, just the rustle of leaves outside and the occasional hoot of an owl. It felt ancient, like we were the only 2 people left in the world. Around midnight, feeling the exhaustion of the long drive and the fresh air, we decided to call it a night. Sleep came easy, despite the unfamiliar surroundings. I woke up sometime in the dead of night, not to an alarm, not to light, but to a faint rhythmic sound. It was distinct, deliberate, and entirely out of place in the silent woods. Tap, top, top. I lay still for a minute, heart thumping against my ribs, trying to rationalize it. A branch hitting the side of the cabin? A nocturnal animal? It sounded too regular for that, too. Intentional, like someone was knocking softly on wood. I nudged Alex awake. He mumbled something incoherent, clearly annoyed, but then he heard it too. His eyes widened in the gloom. We both listened, breathing shallowly. The tapping continued, seemingly coming from the back wall of the cabin, the one facing the deepest part of the woods. We whispered to each other in the dark, trying to figure out what to do. There was no road back there, no path, nothing but dense trees for miles. Who would be out here? Why would they be tapping like that? It wasn't loud enough to demand attention, more like a persistent, quiet query. Alex grabbed the rusty poker from beside the fireplace, a futile weapon, but it made him feel better. We slowly crept towards the back wall, our bare feet freezing on the wooden floorboards. The tapping stopped just as we got close. The silence that followed was even worse than the sound. Felt heavy, expectant. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, listening to nothing but our own ragged breaths. After a few minutes of absolute stillness, Alex, with a surprising burst of courage, whispered, "I'm going to look." He grabbed the only flashlight we had, an old one that flickered slightly when you shook it, and carefully unlocked the back door. It creaked open, revealing nothing but impenetrable darkness. The air was frigid. He shone the beam out into the blackness. Nothing, just the endless, looming trees. He swept the light along the cabin wall, checking for anything that could explain the tapping. A loose board? A broken branch? There was nothing. The logs were solid, the ground beneath them covered in pine needles and fallen leaves. No footprints, no disturbance. It was as if the sound had simply materialized and then vanished. We went back inside, thoroughly spooked, and locked the door tight. The tapping didn't resume. We spent the rest of the night on edge, barely sleeping, jumping at every creak of the old cabin. When morning finally broke, a pale, anemic light filtering through the small windows, we were exhausted and ready to leave. We packed our things in a hurry, not even bothering with coffee. As we were about to walk out the front door, Alex stopped dead. He pointed to the small, dusty window above the fireplace. It was barely visible, set high in the wall. The glass was intact, but something was wrong with the frame. It looked newer, like it had been replaced recently, but poorly. A crude repair job, almost. Then I noticed the faint, dark streaks on the outside of the old wood. Alex, curious despite our haste, went closer. He ran his fingers along the new wood, then peered out. He frowned, then stepped back. "Something's weird," he said, his voice flat. "The woods look different from this side." I didn't get it. Woods were woods, right? Then he pointed to a faint, almost overgrown path leading away from the back of the cabin. A path we hadn't seen the night before. A path that led directly into the deepest part of the forest, exactly where the tapping had come from. It wasn't a game trail. It was wide enough for a person. It was just as we were about to dismiss it as an old logging path that I noticed something else. On the far side of that path, barely visible through the thick canopy, was another cabin. Smaller, even more dilapidated than the one we were in, and completely silent. It was almost hidden, like it wasn't meant to be seen. Alex grabbed my arm, his face pale. "This isn't my uncle's cabin," he whispered. "This isn't the cabin his map led to. This is a different one." He pulled out his crumpled map, comparing it to our surroundings, and then swore under his breath. We had taken a wrong turn somewhere miles back onto a barely discernible logging trail. We had spent the night in a completely different, unlisted, unknown cabin. The tapping hadn't been from outside our cabin. It had been from inside the other one, a silent, desperate signal from whatever was in there trying to get to us. The instinct to turn around, to retrace your steps when something feels off, is a powerful one. But what if turning around only leads you further into the maze? What if the way back isn't the way you came, and every decision you make just tightens the knot of dread around you? The dust from my old Tacoma settled slowly behind me, a fine red cloud hanging in the still air, and I remember thinking it was odd because I hadn't seen another vehicle on this particular stretch of road in almost an hour. Most weekends, I tried to get out of the city and find some peace. I was 28, a software engineer, and the relentless hum of urban life really got to me. That summer, I'd found a remote cabin for rent, deep in the national forest about 3 hours north of Portland. It was advertised as off-grid adjacent, meaning it had solar power but no cell service, and the nearest paved road was a good 20 miles away. Exactly what I was looking for. No distractions, just quiet. The cabin itself was small, rustic, and exactly as pictured. A single room with a loft bed, a wood stove, and a porch overlooking dense pine trees. It was perfect. I'd spent 2 full days hiking, reading, and generally unplugging. My routine involved waking with the sun, making coffee on the propane stove, and then heading out for a long walk. Evenings were for building a small fire, cooking a simple meal, and reading by lamplight. It was gloriously silent. So silent, in fact, that when I heard the first sound on Saturday afternoon, I almost dismissed it as my imagination or maybe an animal. I was on the porch, sketching a particularly gnarled tree, when it happened. A faint, rhythmic thumping sound, barely audible over the breeze through the pines. It sounded like something hitting wood, slowly, steadily. Thump, thump, thump. I paused, pencil in hand, and listened. Continued for a few moments, then stopped. I told myself it was probably a woodpecker, or maybe a branch falling onto a hollow log. This area was teeming with wildlife, after all. There was no one else for miles. I knew that for a fact. I'd driven the access road for ages and hadn't seen a single side trail or turnoff. The next day, Sunday, I was packing up my gear, getting ready to head back to civilization. I had just loaded my backpack into the truck when I heard it again. Clearer this time. A definite thumping. Not like a woodpecker. More like someone hitting a door. My heart gave a little jump. I looked around, scanning the dense tree line. The cabin sat on a small clearing with the single dirt track leading out. There was no other path, no other road, nothing. Who would be out here? And why would they be thumping on something? The sound seemed to be coming from deeper in the woods, not from the road. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a hunter? But it wasn't hunting season. Maybe someone lost? But how would they get here without a vehicle on the road? I stood still, listening intently. The thumping stopped, replaced by a new sound. Footsteps. Dry leaves crunching, twigs snapping. They were moving slowly, deliberately, and they sounded like they were getting closer. I gripped the door handle of my truck, my mind racing. I was alone, miles from anywhere, and someone or something was approaching through the thick undergrowth, making sounds that definitely weren't animalistic. I quickly got into the truck, locking the doors. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the keys. Just as I started the engine, there was a sudden, loud knock. Not on my truck window, but on the cabin door. A clear, distinct, human-sounding knock. I froze, engine idling. I could see the cabin door from my truck's windshield. It was closed, just as I'd left it. No one was visible, but the knock had been undeniable. Sounded solid, heavy, like someone with a fist. I peered through the glass, trying to see if anyone was hiding just out of sight. But the porch was empty, the trees beyond it motionless. I waited, engine running, my foot hovering over the gas pedal. Silence. The cabin door remained closed. The trees stood still. It was like whatever had knocked had simply vanished. I thought about getting out, checking around the cabin, but a primal fear held me in my seat. What if they were waiting? What if they were watching me from the shadows? The rational part of my brain screamed that it was impossible. No car, no visible person, no other way to get here. But the knock had been real. It was too clear, too close to be anything else. My heart hammered against my ribs. I decided to just get out of there. I put the truck in reverse, turned it around, and started slowly down the dirt track. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone emerge from the woods or from behind the cabin. Nothing. Just the cabin getting smaller, disappearing behind the trees. Then, as I drove past the point where the cabin was completely out of sight, I saw it in my mirror. Something reflected in the small, grimy window of the cabin door. It was quick, a flash, a face, pale, indistinct, but definitely there, looking out. And it wasn't the reflection of anything else. I slammed on the brakes, my stomach lurching. I stared at the spot where the cabin had been, but it was gone, swallowed by the trees. Had I imagined it? The angle would have been impossible for it to be my own reflection, and there was nothing else around. It felt like a cold, wet hand had just squeezed my chest. That face, for a split second, was looking directly at me, through the window. But I had been alone. I had been absolutely, completely alone for 2 days. The cabin was miles from the nearest human settlement, with no other roads or trails. Who or what had looked out that window? I didn't stop again until I hit the main highway, hours later. My hands were still gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I replayed the whole thing in my head, over and over. The thumping, the footsteps, the knock, the face. There was no logical explanation. None. I checked the access road meticulously when I arrived. It dead-ended at the cabin. There were no other paths, no other structures, nothing. It was just me and the forest. I still don't know what was knocking on that door, or whose face I saw looking out. But I've never gone back to that cabin, and I never will. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and I'm lying in bed, I think about that face in the window. The way it just appeared, silently watching. And I wonder if I had gone to check, if I had opened that door after the knock, what would have been waiting for me on the other side? The isolation out there was supposed to be peaceful, a cleanse from the constant noise. Instead, it left me with a new kind of silence, one that feels colder and emptier than anything I've ever known. A silence where something was waiting, just beyond the reach of reason. These are the stories that linger, aren't they? Not the monsters under the bed, but the ones in the rearview mirror, or the unsettling silence of a place that shouldn't exist. They stay with us because they tap into that primal fear of the unknown, the vulnerable feeling of being alone when the world outside your car turns hostile. It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest things are simply the ones we can't explain, lurking just off the beaten path. For a new story every week, consider subscribing to Scareverse.